Hello and welcome, you cozy couch potatoes.
Hello and welcome, my cozy couch potatoes. This is Spice Rex Studios, the Cozy Couch, and we are continuing with the People of Sparks, Chapter 22. I'm so excited about how far we are into this book. There we are. Chapter 22 is called Discoveries. Chapter 21 was Tick had what happened? The people of Sparks were doing things to the people of Ember, and people of Ember were starting to do a few things back. They had gotten poison oak from whoever left it on their front door. And Tick has told everyone his plan about getting the towel rods and ready to attack them and steal their food from the storehouse, their extra food, their winter food. So, why don't we dive into Chapter 22, Discoveries? When Lina awoke the next morning, she thought there was something wrong with her eyes. Everything had gone gray. She sat up and looked around. No, it wasn't her eyes. It was the air that was wrong. It was so thick she could hardly see through it. The truck was merely a dark shadow. The buildings of the city had vanished entirely. From somewhere in the murk she heard Casper's voice. He was muttering to himself, as he had been the night before, but she could hear only a low, growly sound, no words. A dark shape appeared and moved toward her. It was Maddy. She bent over and whispered, Don't get up yet. Lie back down." "What's wrong with the air?" Lina asked her. "It's called fog," Maddy said. "It comes in off the water. Now lie down, curl up." I want to know why she said that. Lina lay down and pulled the blanket up under her chin. Maddy knelt beside her and whispered, "Pretend you're sick. Moan and groan a little. Refuse to get up. I'll explain later." Lina followed instructions. She stared up into the swirling grayness and whimpered a little. It wasn't hard to pretend she didn't feel good. She rarely felt so cold and miserable in her life. She saw Maddy and Casper huddling together, two shadowy humps in the fog. They were talking, and their voices rose, but she couldn't make out what they were saying. She must have gone to sleep again. When she opened her eyes, the fog was thinner. A pale sun like a circle of paper shone through it. Without sitting up, she looked around for Maddy and saw her sitting on the back of the truck, eating. She didn't see Casper anywhere. "Maddy," she whispered. Maddy jumped down and came over to her. "You can get up now," she said. "He's gone." Lina sat up. "Gone?" Maddy nodded. "Into the ruins. He won't give up this notion of finding treasure. Something in his mind has slipped, I think. He wasn't all that steady to begin with, and now he's lost his balance." She took Lena's hand and pulled her to her feet, and together they folded the blanket. He wants you to help him with his search. Go into the small spaces where he can't go. I told him you'd help tomorrow, but today you weren't well, so he went off to look around by himself. Preliminary exploration, he called it. "I don't want to help him," Lina said. "You aren't going to," said Maddy. "We are leaving." "We are? When? How?" Lina asked. "Now," said Maddy. "Come and help me." Oh man, they're gonna leave Casper? Do you know what Torin would do to Lina and Maddy if he knew that they left him? I mean, he's already framing Dune and starting a war, essentially, over them going with Casper. And now, if he finds out that they've left his brother in a dangerous city, especially like if something happens to Casper, and he finds out, oh my goodness. Good thing he's just a kid. Maddie climbed up onto the truck, unstrapped the two bicycles, and handed them. Okay, I guess that's a little better if they're only taking the bikes and not taking the truck. I thought they were taking the truck and just stranding him there. But if they're taking the bikes, it's going to be a long trip, but less horrible for Casper, I guess. All right. Maddie climbed up onto the truck, unstrapped the two bicycles, and handed them down to Lina. She opened the food chest and took out some of the remaining travelers' cakes, along with 2 water bottles, and she wrapped these in blankets and tied them with rope. Here, she said to Lina, this pack is yours and this bike. You mean we're going to ride all the way back to Sparks? Lina thought with horror of the vast, empty distance and blazing heat. We won't have to ride all the way, Maddie said. There are lots of roamers. Someone will help us. And we just leave Casper here by himself? Lina wasn't sure that even someone as unlikable as Casper should be abandoned in this terrible place. Lina, you're a nice person. He'll be fine, said Maddie. He has his truck and all his supplies. He doesn't need us. Although if someone else does come by and the truck and his supplies are all by themselves, with him nowhere in sight, he might get robbed and actually stranded there. So they tied the packs onto their backs. They walked the bikes across the rubbly parts of the road until they came to the place where it opened out into the long downhill curve. Just then the fog lifted and the air came clear. Lina turned around to take a last look at the city she had such hopes for, the city she thought might be a home for the people of Ember. In the sunlight, it looked more sad than terrible. Over the rolling grass-covered mounds, the skeletons of the old towers stood like watchmen. The trees bent their backs before the wind, and the wind swept ripples across the surface of the green water that wrapped around the city's edges. Maybe, thought Lina, the sparkling city she'd seen in her mind was a vision from the distant future, not the distant past. Maybe someday the people of Ember, or the great-great-grandchildren of today's people of Ember, would come back here and build the city again. All right, said Maddie. Let's ride. Lina flung her leg over the bike and settled herself on the seat. This was a bigger bike than the one she was used to. She gripped the handlebars, gave a push with her foot, and she was off. From the start, the bike moved so fast she hardly had to pedal. She zoomed forward, going far faster than even her fastest running. The wind in her face swept her hair out behind her, shot through her clothes, nearly peeled back her eyelids. The bumps in the road made the handlebars buck like something alive. She held on with a steel grip. It was absolutely terrifying and absolutely joyful. Down the long hill they went, she and Maddie alone on the wide, empty highway. No need to pedal at all, only steer around broken places or bits of debris. The fast air came into Lina's mouth and buffeted down into her lungs, and she laughed out loud. It was such a glorious freedom. When the slope leveled out a little, she steered the bike into big curves, back and forth, and Maddie did too. They whooped and laughed and raced each other, and alongside them the white birds swooped too, screeching in their shrill voices. I feel like Maddie is going to be welcomed into Lina's little family. Lina, Mrs. Murdo, Dune, his dad, Poppy, and now Maddie. And that makes me a little happy. I hope that happens. Then came a long stretch of flat road and hard pedaling, with many stops for resting and eating and drinking water. They rode all day. Lina's seat was sore, and her legs grew tired. Blisters rose on her hands from holding so tight to the handlebars, but Maddy said, just a little farther, and then we'll stop. And Lina kept going, finding strength when she thought it was gone, until at last, at the end of the day, they came to the place where the water ended, and they could begin to turn eastward toward the hills. Here they stopped for the night. They found a creek with a trickle of clear water running along the bottom. Maddy said the round green leaves that grew on the creek's banks were good to eat, so they had those with their travelers' cakes, along with some wild onions and a few blackberries they found deep in a thicket of bramble. There was no cold wind here, as there had been near the city. The evening was warm and still, except for the chirping of frogs in the creek. They spread their blankets on the ground. Somewhere in the dark, an owl hooted softly, and another answered. Maddy was lying on her back with her hands clasped over her wide stomach. Selina gazing at her profile against the sky, she looked like a small range of hills, solid and comforting. Selina dared to ask a question that had been troubling her. I wonder, where if this were to be a real place, and if it's based on, a country, I assume it would be America. I don't actually know, but that's what's in my head. I wonder where they would be. Because they said in the time of chilling and then winter, they didn't say snow, they said rain. And it's really hot, but their winter is not snow, it's rain. But it gets cold. I wonder where they would be. I don't know. It's interesting to me, though. That's just what popped into my head. Alright. This question of Helena's. Maddy, she said, could there ever be another disaster like the one that came before? Or even worse? What if every single person and every single animal was killed? Don't worry, said Maddy. People didn't make life, so they can't destroy it. Even if we were to wipe out every bit of life in the world, we can't touch the place life comes from. Whatever made plants and animals and people spring up in the first place will always be there, and life will spring up again. Maddy turned over and tugged her blanket around her neck. Time to sleep now, she said. More hard riding tomorrow. In the morning they were on their way as soon as the sun rose. Lina groaned as she got on her bike again. Her muscles were sore from yesterday. But she soon warmed up, and for a long time the road was flat and the riding was easy. After an hour or so, Lina spotted something moving up ahead of them, a dot in the distance. Look, she called to Maddy, who was a little way behind her, and she pointed. I think it's a truck, maybe a roamer. In 10 minutes or so they had caught up to it. The man driving the truck turned when he heard them calling. Surprise lit up his face, and he halted his oxen and jumped down. Greetings, he cried. Glad to see some travelers. Haven't met anyone on the road for 4 days. He was a short, stocky man with a wild fuzz of black hair that stood out several inches all around his head. Pelton Moss was his name, and he was indeed a roamer, as was easy to see from the crates and barrels on his truck. All his containers were nearly empty, though. He had sold his most recent load of goods to a remote South Bay settlement. Now he was heading back in the direction of Sparks. I'll take you with me, he said, if you'll help me with my collecting on the way. That's fair. And so for 5 days, Lina got to be a roamer. At every ancient abandoned town, they stopped and combed through the derelict houses. Not much was left. These houses had been picked nearly clean in the last 200 years. But sometimes, if they looked carefully, they found things the previous roamers had overlooked, or things they had thought worthless. Lina loved these searches. In some ways, it was like being a messenger back in Ember. She could go everywhere, look in every forgotten corner, and if she was lucky, make discoveries. And she was lucky. She found a silver locket with a picture of someone inside. Though the picture was so old and stained, she couldn't tell if it was a woman or a baby. She found a small, round pane of glass with a handle. The glass made whatever you looked at appear bigger. A magnifying glass, said Pelton. Nice. She found a tiny red truck with wheels that still turned. She found a strip of leather with a buckle and two round metal pieces attached to it. It was too short to be a belt. There were words on the metal circles, and they were so worn she couldn't read them. That's a dog collar, Pelton told her. Not very useful, but interesting. At a house that stood by itself far out in a field, she opened a cabinet on a back porch, where the screen was hanging in brown flaps. In the cabinet was a box that said Monopoly in faded letters on its lid. That's cool. Sorry. Inside were tiny dotted cubes and tiny bits of wood shaped like houses. Wonderful, Pelton exclaimed. Extremely rare. There was another box in the cabinet with a picture of a garden on top and a heap of oddly shaped pieces of cardboard inside. A puzzle. And at the back of the cabinet, in a clutter of broken dolls, torn pages from books, and little jars of dried up paint, Lina found a bar of metal about 3 inches long that Pelton said was a magnet. Put it up against the truck, he said. It'll stick right on there. Even as she enjoyed the searching, though, Lina couldn't help imagining how it would be for the people of Ember to come out into this empty land and try to start a town. How would they turn the hard, cracked earth into fields of crops? What would they build houses with? What would they eat while they chopped at the soil and put together their shelters? A picture rose in her mind of Ember's 400 people scattered across the brown fields like a flock of lost birds scratching in the dry grass for seeds or bugs, huddling for shade beneath the few trees, trying to build shelters of sticks or straw. She shuddered and made the picture go away. It was best to keep her attention on searching. Maddy didn't do much searching. She didn't care for bending over and creeping underneath things and wedging her large self into small spaces. While Lina and Pelton hunted, she walked around in the fields and the overgrown gardens behind the houses, looking for old fruit trees, wild grapevines, and the kinds of leaves, roots, nuts, and mushrooms that were all right to eat. Lina would look out the window of the house she was poking through and see Maddy wading through knee-high grass toward a gnarled apple tree. Or she'd see her wide back in among the bushes as she picked berries. Sometimes Maddy simply sat. Lina would see her settled into an ancient lawn chair, gazing across the field or up the street, not moving at all. What was she thinking about? Lina wondered at those times. She looked so serious. On the evening of the third day, they stopped by a wide, slow part of the river. As the sun went down, they sat on the river bank, drinking cool tea that Pelton made with mint leaves, and they talked. Pelton told about the places he'd seen, and Maddy and Lina told about Casper's quest in the city, his mad study of the old songs about treasure. Oh, yes, said Pelton. I've heard those old rhymes all my life, and my father before me heard them too. It's an old verse, or a song, I think, come down from years ago and scrambled, probably, in the process. Everyone says it in a different way. Something like this, he sang in a sweet but off-key voice. There's buried treasure in the ancient city. Remember, remember, from times of old. What's hidden will come to light again. It's far more precious than diamonds and gold. I have a feeling that the Emberites are the treasure. They're the ancient city that will come to light. So they were the people that were going to come out of the darkness, and it's more precious than diamonds and gold because it's people. I think that was the treasure. Like, that's what I'm getting from the rhyme. That's just me. That's the way I heard it from an old man who lives up in the mountains near Angel Rock. Then I heard another version from Maggie Pierce over by Falter. She sings it like this. Maggie Pierce is a character name in Grey's Anatomy. This book, I believe, came before Maggie Pierce and Grey's Anatomy, but the name just connected like this. Remember the city, remember. I don't think it's remember. Maybe the first part, but I bet it's been translated wrong. Remember the city of Ember, where I'll finish reading it. Remember the city, remember, where the treasure is hidden under the ground. The city, always remember, that's where the treasure will be found. What if it said, remember the city of Ember, where treasure is hidden under the ground. The city, always remember, that's where the treasure will be found. They're talking about Ember. I know they are. Like, they have to be, right? Maybe I'm way off. Maybe there's just a random ancient city with a treasure under the ground. But to me, it's Ember. Lina stared at him. Her mouth dropped open. Her eyebrows flew upward and her heart thudded in her chest. He laughed. What are you looking so amazed at? Think you're going to go find this treasure? Nobody believes these old things anymore. They're nursery nonsense, old jingles made up to put babies to sleep. Some still believe it, said Maddy, but it's only those with a bit of madness in them, and a good measure of greed. That's right, said the roamer. I've known a few like that. One of 'em was sure it was in the old city of Sanazay, and spent his whole life digging through the ruins looking for it. Finally died when a chimney fell on him. My goodness. Maddy snorted. Such nonsense people believe, she said. Lina was shaking her head. She began to smile. No, she said. No, you have it wrong. She laughed. She couldn't help it. It isn't nonsense. It's true. I'm sure. What she suddenly knew seemed so wonderful and astonishing that she leapt up and clapped her hands and laughed again. You're a silly one, said the roamer. I'm not silly. The city in that rhyme. It's the city I come from. What's the matter with her, he said. Has she got a fever? Maddy reached up for Lina's hand. Calm down now, she said. Tell us what you're talking about. So Lina explained. Sing the first line again. The first line of the second song, she said. Pelton eyed her strangely, but he sang. Remember the city, remember, where the treasure is hidden under the ground. The first line, said Lina. I'm sure it's meant to be, remember the city of Ember. That's the name of my home. It was under the ground. Not sure I believe that, said Pelton. I think it's true, said Maddy. They all say it, though all the ones who came from there. And what about the treasure then? Pelton asked. It was us, cried Lina. We were the treasure, the people of Ember. She felt a swell of love all of a sudden for her old city. Sing that first song again, the last lines of it. Pelton sang. What's hidden will come to light again. It's far more precious than diamonds and gold. You see, said Lina, come to light. We came up into the light, and we were more precious than diamonds and gold, because they thought we might be the last people, the only ones left. The three of them gazed at each other in wonder. I believe she's right, said Maddy at last. Maybe so, said Pelton. He stared curiously at Lina. You lived underground? So then the rest of the evening Lina told about the city of Ember, and how she had been a messenger there, and how she and June had found the way out. It was late when they finally lay down for the night. Lina couldn't sleep at first, thinking of the old songs and what they meant. Someone long ago had hoped that at least a few people would survive, and had wanted them to remember her city and the treasure it held, the treasure that was most valuable of all, herself, her family, and all the generations of people who had lived in that secret place. Their purpose, though they didn't know it, to make sure that human beings did not vanish from the world, no matter what happened above. I Dad's right, or at least Lina thinks I'm right. That is it for chapter 22, technically. There is a next bit that is a third town meeting with no chapter number before the next chapter. So, yeah. I'm going to go ahead and read that with this one. Alright, the third town meeting. After the rampage in the plaza, the 3 town leaders went up to the tower room for an urgent meeting. They flopped into their chairs and sat without speaking for a few moments, staring down at the mess below. "What do we do now?" said Wilmer. Ben curled both hands into fists and set them on the table in front of him. "The cave people," he said, "must leave." "Leave," said Mary. "Leave," said Ben. "They must go away from here." "But they haven't been here 6 months yet," said Wilmer. "They must go now," said Ben. "It's better for them anyhow to leave before winter really sets in." "They won't want to leave," said Wilmer, tugging anxiously at a strand of his hair. "I think they understand now that there's nowhere for them to go." "They must go," said Ben. "We can never feel safe while they are here. If they refuse to go, we will force them to. We have the means to do it." There was a long silence. Ben and Mary glared at each other. Wilmer's eyes darted anxiously between them. At last, Mary set the palms of her hands on the table and took a long breath. "You're speaking of the weapon," she said. "That's right," said Ben. "We have it for situations of dire emergencies." "We have it for situations of dire emergency. I think we have an emergency now." "We've never used it before," said Wilmer. "We don't even know how to work it." "I think it is unwise to use it," said Mary. "We have always tried our best not to repeat the mistakes of our ancestors. Using the weapon would be the first step down the path they took." "We may not actually have to use the weapon," said Ben. "All we have to do is threaten them with it. Just the sight of it will make them do what we say. That is, leave." "What you are proposing," said Mary, "is sending 400 people to their deaths." "Not necessarily," said Ben. "The village of Sparks started with almost nothing. Why shouldn't they? It's not true that we started with nothing. The founders of Sparks came here from the old cities, in a truck loaded with enough food and supplies to keep them going for months. These people have nothing at all." "We will send a truck with them, then," said Ben, "with barrels of water, some food, and some basic supplies." "That would last them about a week," said Mary. "Besides, they have no skills. They haven't had time to learn them." Ben sighed impatiently. "Are we supposed to subject our own people to hardship and danger because of a bunch of refugees from a cave? Isn't it our job to protect our own people?" "But if they rebel against this order," said Wilmer, "then what?" "I bet Tick will make sure they do rebel." "I thought I had made that clear," said Ben. "We use force. It is our only option." He pondered for a moment, frowning into the air above Wilmer's head. "We'll put the weapon on a truck and take it to the hotel. If they put up any resistance, it'll be right there, ready to use." He thumped a fist on the table. "I say we give them a day to prepare. The day after tomorrow they will leave Sparks, all of them, for good. Shall we vote on it?" They nodded. "I vote yes," said Ben. "They must leave." "I vote no," said Mary. Wilmer stared down at his hands. He swallowed. He shook a shaky breath. He said. I vote yes." So it was decided. They would make the announcement that very night, calling the people of Ember together after they were through with work and before they went back to the hotel. Ben would be the one to tell them. He would make it clear that the decision was final. That is it for chapter 22 and the third meeting. My cozy couch potatoes. I enjoyed this chapter. I enjoyed Lina and Maddy bonding and becoming friends and a little concerned about Casper and how he's gonna feel once he realizes, and when will we know when he realizes. But oh, the stress I feel about what's happening in Sparks. Oh, well, my cozy couch potatoes, that's all I've got for you this video. I hope you enjoyed this chapter as much as I did, and I will see you next time. Have a good one. Bye.